Well, again, it's so good to see all of you here worshiping today. This is what I want to encourage you to do. Take your Bibles or your smartphones or whatever you have, open that app, open up your scriptures to Matthew chapter 5. And then also, take out your Bible study outlines. They're found here in the center of your bulletin, and that way you can follow along and take notes. And those of you that are worshiping over the Creekside service, we are so glad you're part of this congregation. God's doing amazing things in every one of our locations at our church, and so we're so thankful for you. We want you to participate as well. As most of you know, we are in a series we're studying through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus has been teaching us how to live a blessed life. Because if we're really going to be blessed by God, we've got to obey Jesus' commands. Now, they're difficult. Because what Jesus tells us to do is he says, you know what? I don't want your external religion. I want your heart. That's what Jesus says. And so what Jesus says is, okay, in the Old Testament, you were told, do not murder. But I'm telling you, if you got bitter anger in your heart, that's like murder to me. I want your heart. Or we saw last week, okay, in the Old Testament it says do not commit adultery, but Jesus says don't even lust in your heart. And so each one of these commands, Jesus is calling us to guard our heart. And today's passage is probably, I think, one of the most difficult passages in the entire Bible to obey. Because Jesus is going to tell us to love our enemies. Check it out. Look at how Jesus starts off this passage. It's in Matthew chapter 5, beginning verse 38. Jesus says this, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person." And then he's going to tell you to turn the other cheek, and he's going to tell you to go the extra mile. He's going to tell you to give to the person who asks of you. He's going to tell you to love your enemy. And we're going to go, how? This is impossible. How can we do this? In essence, what Jesus is going to teach us to do is to turn our revenge into love. Now, why is this so difficult for us? I'll tell you why. Because inside every one of our hearts, there is this innate sense of justice. We intuitively know right from wrong, and whenever we've been wronged, we want justice. Let me give you an example of this. Whenever my youngest son, John, was still in elementary school, apparently one day, this girl in his class hit him with a rock. Now, I don't know if he provoked her, but she hit him with a rock. And so he had been taught not to take his own revenge, but to go to his teacher. And so that's exactly what he does. He goes to his teacher and reports what had happened. Now, apparently, because John was, one, not crying, and two, she didn't see it, the teacher didn't do anything. Well, that was a Friday, and John came home upset. "Justice has not been done. I have been wronged, and I went to the teacher, and she didn't do anything about it." And all weekend long, John railed against the injustice that had been done to him. Well, he came to church on Sunday and came to his Sunday school class, and just so happens his Sunday school classroom is the identical classroom as his academy classroom. And there he is in Sunday school, and he sees the girl's desk that had hit him with a rock, and at her desk was a balloon. And the entire class time, John is going, "I have been wronged. I have been wronged. Justice needs to be served." And by the end of that class, he had popped her balloon. Now, why did John do that? Well, you see, we do exactly the same thing. It may be big ways, small ways. We've all been hurt. And so how do you handle the hurts that happen in your life? Whenever you want to pop somebody's balloon, what do you do with that? How do you literally turn your revenge into love? Well, Jesus is going to teach us how in this passage. 3 amazing principles that I want you to look at what Jesus teaches us today. And I want you to jot them on your outline. Very first thing is this. Jot this down. First of all, God established government for justice. God has established the government for civil justice. In fact, what Jesus does here, he starts off this passage by quoting an Old Testament civil law. Check it out. Look at it in verse 38. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth." Now, folks, that's perfect justice. It is. I mean, it's great. It's a perfect ethical way to live life. You poke out my eye, I get to poke out your eye. Now, what's amazing about that justice is that it's equal justice under the law. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic background you are. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're powerful or weak. If you poke out somebody's eye, your eye is going to get poked out. Okay? That's the way it is. In fact, that law was designed to actually prevent revenge. But the problem is it didn't prevent revenge. It always escalated. Why? Because you poked out my eye, but you poked out my eye harder. And so, well, you did that harder than what I did it. And you know what? I'm going to poke out your son's eye. Well, I'm going to poke out your mama's eye, right? And it just escalates more and more, generation of generation. Exhibit A, the Middle Eastern conflict, okay? That's how this thing has happened, right? It escalates. Now, why is it that it always escalates? I'll tell you why. Because our pain always feels greater than their pain. Always. I heard a story about this mom who had two sons, a 5-year-old boy named Billy and a toddler. And one day, she hears this screaming upstairs, and she goes, "Billy, what's going on up there?" And like all kids, what do they say? "Nothing," right? And then she goes, "No, something's going on. What's going on, Billy?" "Well, the baby pulled my hair, and it hurt really bad, and he's going to get it." And she goes, No, Billy, leave the baby alone. The baby doesn't understand. The baby doesn't understand that pulling the hair hurts. Don't do anything, Billy." And so 5 seconds of silence goes by, and all of a sudden this scream from the baby. And she goes, "What happened, Billy?" "The baby now understands." See, that's us. We have been hurt, and we want somebody else to understand. We want them to feel what we have felt. And so what does Jesus say? You know what? If you're going to live your life that way, it's always going to escalate out of control. And so what does Jesus tell us to do? Verse 39, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person." Now, let me just explain something. When Jesus says do not resist an evil person, let me tell you what he is not saying. Jesus is not saying that we, can't have justice. He's not saying that, if a burglar comes to your house, don't call 911. Don't resist that evil person. He's not saying that. He's not saying if there's another Hitler that arises, you don't go to war and try to stop him, that we're all to be pacifists. That is not what Jesus is teaching here. He's talking about your own personal heart. In fact, the Bible makes it very clear that God has actually set up authorities in our life, and specifically government authorities in our life, to provide justice for us. Check it out. Look how the Apostle Paul puts this in Romans chapter 13, verse 4. The Bible says this, "For government is God's servant." Literally, the word there is deacon, "an avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong." God has established authorities in your life. God has established government in your life, and we are to appeal to those authorities to protect us and bring about justice in our life. I mean, the Apostle Paul did this. Paul was under the Jewish, faith. And what happened whenever the Jewish leaders wanted to kill him? What did he do? He then appealed to a higher authority. He appealed to the Roman government to protect him. See, God expects us to use the authorities he's established to provide justice and protection in our life. And so if we have a woman in our church here whose husband is beating her up at home, we do not say, "Well, go back home and don't resist him, let him beat you up some more." No, we say, call the police and get the bum arrested, right? That's what the Bible tells you to do. And so Jesus is not saying, hey, don't have any justice in your life. He's simply saying, don't take justice into your own hands. You protect your heart, you submit to the authorities you have, and allow them to take care of the justice, and you deal with your heart, okay? That's the first thing you need to understand about this passage. But there's a second principle. How do you deal with the revenge that is building up in your heart? That's the second thing Jesus teaches us. Jot this on your outline. God expects you to release your revenge. God expects you to release your revenge. Because here's the deal, folks. You're all going to get hurt. Everybody in this room is going to get hurt probably every week. So what are you going to do with it? Are you going to let it build up? Are you going to replay it over and over again and you just become more and more bitter? Or are you going to do what Jesus says, and that is forgive and release it and go on? That's what Jesus is going to teach us to do. Now, what Jesus is going to do here, he's actually going to give us 4 examples of how people were abused in his day. And he gives them an action of how they need to respond in each one of those circumstances, okay? And so what are they? Now, here's the thing. For each one of these 4 things, it requires you to die to yourself. It requires you to give up and right. And so what are the 4 ways that we get hurt? We'll jot them down. First of all, when your pride is hurt. When your pride is hurt. Anybody here get their pride hurt ever? Of course we do. Maybe it's somebody at school that bullies you. Maybe it's somebody at work that belittles you. That's what Jesus is talking about, verse 39. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. Now, for someone to be struck on the right cheek, what does that mean? It is a backhanded slap. Most of us are right-handed. If we punch somebody, we would hit them on their left jaw. So to be hit on the right cheek means it is a sign of, humility. It's like spitting on somebody. It's designed to, take away their pride and humiliate somebody. That's what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is not saying, hey, put up with abuse in your life. Hey, let them beat you up. That is not what Jesus is saying by turning the other cheek. Jesus is saying, whenever your pride is hurt, turn the other cheek and get past it. Trust me with that. Now, what I love about everything that Jesus says here is that Jesus actually puts limits on what we're to do. I mean, Jesus says, turn the other cheek. He doesn't say turn a dozen cheeks, does he? He says, go the extra mile. He doesn't say go 100 extra miles. He says, okay, if he wants your shirt, give him your cloak as well. He doesn't say, well, give him all your stuff. Jesus, even in this, Jesus has limits of what we are to do, all right? I love this story. There was a pastor that before he came to Christ, he was a prize fighter. And then he becomes an evangelist, and he was in a small church, preaching one revival. And afterwards, there was these 2 punks in the town that said, hey, I understand Jesus says you got to turn the other cheek. And so he punches the pastor. The pastor says, you're right, Jesus tells me to turn the other cheek. And then the guy punches him again. And then the pastor says, my Lord has given me no further instruction. And then he beats the crud out of him. Not sure if that's exactly what Jesus is saying, but you get the idea. Jesus is not saying put up with abuse, but if your pride has been wounded, will you trust God with it and release it to him? Second thing is this, when your livelihood is threatened. When your livelihood is threatened, maybe it's your financial well-being, it could be your boss, a fellow employee, it's maybe some lawsuit. That's what Jesus is referring to in verse 40. Jesus says, if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Now, that was a big deal. Now, in that day, most people had several shirts, but they only had one cloak. Why? The cloak was the outer garment, and it was actually protection. It would keep you warm. It was the kind of garment that you have that you would sleep in. It would be like a blanket at night. And so for Jesus to say, be willing to give up your cloak, that was a great risk. But what is Jesus saying? Will you trust me? Will you trust me with your finances? Now, I've shared this story before, but whenever I was going to Bible college in Dallas, I was just barely making it financially. At the time, I threw a paper route, and most of you that have gotten a paper before, you understand how it works. The paper carrier is responsible for paying for all the papers. And so if the customer doesn't pay for a paper, well, that's on the paper carrier. He has to eat that, okay? And so I was barely making it financially, and I threw a morning paper, evening paper, weekend paper, that kind of thing. And the area of town where I threw was Arlington, Texas. It was Lake Arlington. It was like the richest part of all of Arlington, and, mansions there. And so I had thrown this, this particular house, and they hadn't paid. And so I put a little bill in the paper, and he didn't pay for a second month, so I go to his house. The wife answers the door and says, hey, you're a couple of months back, and so she writes me a check. I'm like, awesome. And so then I throw a third month thinking that I've been paid, and then I discover that her check had bounced. By this time, they owe me now $60. Now, for me, in that day, $60, that was what I would eat on for an entire week. Okay, so this is a big deal for me. And so I go to their house, their mansion, knock on the door. The husband comes to the door and said, hey, your check bounced. You now owe me for 3 months. And he said, well, we ain't paying. Cancel my subscription. Slams the door in my face. I walked back to my old Ford past his new Mercedes-Benz, and I was eat up. You see, I drove by his house twice a day, in the morning and every afternoon. And every time I passed by that house, that rage became more and more. And I start imagining how I can get my 60 bucks. You know what? I can slash those Mercedes-Benz tires at 4 o'clock in the morning, nobody even know about it. I can throw a rock through their beautiful stained glass window. You know what? I was even imagining ways that I could firebomb their house with them in it. I'm just being real with you, okay? And I'm telling you, I was getting eat up. And eventually I came to the point where I said, God, I can't live like this. I'm going to choose to release their debt. I forgive them. God, empower me. And I'm telling you, at that moment, healing happened. But I had to make the choice. That's what Jesus is talking about here. There's a third way that we get hurt. What is that? When your liberty is stolen. When your liberty is stolen. I mean, most of us are, give me liberty or give me death, right? Well, that's exactly how the Jews were in that day. And yet the Romans were their authority. And the Romans, they had a law that asked any Jewish citizen that a soldier could force a Jewish citizen to carry their pack for a mile. And the Jews hated it because it was forced slavery, labor. And so what did Jesus say to them? Verse 41, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. That's where we get the expression, go the extra mile. Now, most likely, there's not going to be a soldier who's going to force you to carry his pack for a mile. But you know what? Next week, you may have a supervisor that makes your life miserable. And maybe just at closing time or whatever it is, he comes to you, puts something on your desk and say, hey, I need this done before tomorrow morning. Big project. Can't leave. What are you going to say? You go, okay. You're going to do your best. You're going to serve with excellence. And whenever you do the best project you can, you put it on his desk with a little note on it, and you said, you know, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate all you do for the company. I appreciate your desire for excellence. Hope you have a great week. What do you call that? That's called going the extra mile. That's what Jesus tells us to do. Even when we don't feel like it. There's a fourth thing Jesus asks us to do. Okay, fourth way we can get hurt is when your generosity is abused. Because a lot of people will object to Jesus' words here. They'll go, wait a minute, people are going to abuse this. And Jesus said, yep, most likely some people are going to take advantage of you. Check it out. Look at it, verse 42. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Former President Jimmy Carter wrote a book about his mom. He said whenever he was growing up, it was during the Depression, and he remembers that many times there were these hobos, because there were so many people unemployed, that would come by and ask for a meal. And always his mom would either give them a sandwich or some fruit or some type of meal and send them on their way. Well, one day, this hobo they'd never seen before comes by, and Rosalind asked him, how do you know to come to my house? I mean, with all my neighbors, you don't go to any of my neighbor's house. How do you know to come to my house for a meal? And he says, well, here's the secret. There's a distinguishing mark on your mailbox that lets all of us know that this is a house where we can get a free meal. You see, that's what Jesus is saying. There needs to be a distinguishing mark on your life, on your house, on your pocketbook, on this church that says, world, we care. We love. We may get taken advantage of, but we're going to care for people around us. That's what Jesus is asking us to do. Now, you look at these 4 ways. Every one of us have been hurt in those 4 ways in one way or another. And so what do? Do you get all bitter and angry and I'm going to fight back, I'm going to get my piece of flesh, I'm going to poke your eye out, I'm going to pull your hair? Or are you going to say, Christ, I need you. Help me to forgive and release this and go on. I love the way Pastor Charles Haddon Spurgeon put it. He said this, as Christians, we are called to be the anvil when bad people are the hammers. Ever see a hammer and anvil? I mean, basically the hammer bounces off of the anvil. That's what we're called to be. The world's going to hit us. They are. And we are to reflect their blows and not have a knee-jerk reaction and respond like everybody else responds. And whenever we respond that way, we're going to be following the wisdom of Scripture. Look how Proverbs puts it. Solomon said this in Proverbs 12:16. He says, a prudent man overlooks an insult. See, if we will put into practice Jesus' words here, it will end the conflicts. If we don't, conflicts always escalate. And so Jesus says we've got to learn to release our revenge to him. That's what he's telling us to do. But there's one final principle that Jesus tells us to do here, and it's this. Number 3 is this. God enables you to love your enemy. If you do this, God's going to enable you to love your enemy. Now, folks, this is when it really gets hard. You think that what I've said so far is hard? What Jesus tells us next is even harder. A couple of weeks back, I read the story of Tom Skinner. He's an African-American evangelist who wrote the book, a classic book called Black and Free. It's his testimony. See, he was once a gang leader when he was a teenager in New York City of the Harlem Lords. Very violent gang there in New York City. He comes to faith in Jesus Christ and is radically changed. Immediately, he leaves the gang, begins to tell every person around him about his faith in Jesus Christ. Well, he was a senior in high school at the time and actually on the high school football team. And during one of their games, he was to block a linebacker and allow his running back to score a touchdown, which that's exactly what happened. But after the play was over, a white boy on the other side that he had blocked got up and punched Tom in the stomach. And then hit him in the back of the neck. And whenever Tom went down on the ground, he began to kick him on the ground. And what did he say? He said to Tom, he said, "You dirty black N-word, I'll teach you a thing or two." Now, Tom said normally he would have got up and thrashed the guy and the boy would be dead by the end of the day. But he got up this time, looked him in the eyes and says, "You know, because of Jesus Christ, I love you anyway," and went back to the huddle. And Tom goes, "I can't believe that. God really has changed my heart." Here's the amazing thing. 2 months later, that boy that had said that to him and hit him comes back to Tom and said this, "Tom, you've done more to knock prejudice out of me than anything by telling me you love me after I treated you that way. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." And you go, how in the world can we live that way? That's what Jesus is calling us to do. How can we live that way? Well, I want you to tell you how. First thing I want you to see is what love really looks like, okay? Jot this on your outline. First of all, you need to understand everybody has natural love. Everybody has some kind of natural love. It's really not love at all. It's called self-preservation. Look again how Jesus says this. If you love those who love you, are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? I mean, basically, Jesus says we need to love differently than how the world lives. I mean, drug lords love, people that love him. We've got to love them differently. Now, it doesn't come natural, folks. See, whenever somebody treats us unkindly, it's not natural to be kind back to them. I once read a story about a Southern gentleman who went to New York City for a visit. And while he was there, he decides to take in a Broadway show. He notices that he's sitting next to a guy, enters into a conversation with him, and discovers that the guy next to him is a university professor, a graduate of Harvard. And so he asks him, he says, "So where are you from?" And the professor looks at him and says, "Where I'm from, we do not end our sentences with a preposition." So the Southern gentleman looks at him and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Where are you from, jerk?" That's how we naturally will respond. That comes natural, doesn't it? That's easy. Jesus says, no, I want you to act supernatural, which is the next point. As Christians, we need a supernatural kind of love. We need a kind of love that doesn't respond back that way. A supernatural love. That's what Jesus is asking us for. Look at it, verse 44. Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. There was a Jewish man who had a Christian friend who compelled him to read the New Testament. By the time this Jewish man reached Matthew chapter 5, he quit. He says, Jesus' standards are impossible. They're unrealistic. Nobody can do this. And you know what? He's right. You can't do this in your own strength. You cannot obey these words in your own power. Only through the Spirit of God are we able to love the way Jesus asked us to love. This is an impossible kind of love, and yet we can do it if we will trust the Lord. Because I'm telling you something, when you choose to obey Christ in this way by faith, He will empower you with a power that is beyond you. That's what the Bible teaches us. I remember years ago, I was in Texas at the time. I was discipling 8 people. Every Thursday night, we went through this thing called Master Life. And every Thursday night, I met with them in this discipleship time, and I got to know them really well. And it was coming near the end. We were going to cover praying for and loving our enemies, and I knew that was coming up. And so I came up with this idea. I said, I know all of you pretty well, and to be honest, I probably know who your enemies are. I probably know who you're avoiding at church because I hear you talk bad about them. And I said, this is what I want you to do this next week. I want you to pray for that person this next week. And then I gave them each a $5 bill. And I said, I want you to take this $5 bill and I want you to pray about it, how you can bless that person this next week. And you can add to it, but at least with this $5, I want you to bless that other person. And then next week, we're going to come back and report what happened. Here's the amazing thing. Every person in that group said something supernatural happened this week. As I started praying for that person that I dislike, and I start praying, God, how can I use this $5 to bless them? Something happened in my heart. I actually started finding joy, and I was a little giddy of how I could actually bless this person. Something happened in my heart. You see, that's what happens. When you choose to obey Christ by faith, that's whenever supernaturally He will give you the power to do the impossible. That's what Christ is asking us to do. Now, I want to give you two primary motivations to help you do that. So what are they? Jot them on your outline. This seems impossible, but you can do this if you have these two motivations. Number one is this. This kind of supernatural love comes from remembering your own forgiveness. See, you've got to recall and keep at the forefront of your mind your own forgiveness. You got to remember the grace of God in your life. You got to remember Christ's sacrifice on your behalf. See, the problem with a lot of us, we've been saved for so long, we forgot how lost we really were. In fact, look at how we are described. This is who we are, according to Ephesians chapter 2, who we were before we met Jesus Christ. Look at this passage. You were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, once lived in the passions of your flesh, and were by nature children of wrath. You know what Paul's saying? Paul is saying, apart from the grace of Jesus Christ, every person in this room would be the most hardened hater of God on this planet. Everything you have is a gift from the grace of God. You have been blessed by God. You're saved by God. You experience the grace of God. You are riding on the coattails of Jesus Christ for everything you have. And what we have the audacity to not forgive others whenever we've been forgiven, right? Think of it. One of my favorite stories from the NBA happened whenever Michael Jordan had a classic night where he scored 69 points in one night. After the game was over, one of Michael's teammates, Stacey King, was asked what he thought about that memorable, game. Now, Stacey King was just a role player. He sat on the bench most of the time. In fact, in that game, Stacey King only scored 1 point. And that's what makes his remarks so remarkable. He says this, quote, I'll always remember this as the night that Michael Jordan and I combined for 70 points. I love that. Because he rode Michael Jordan's coattails to 3 NBA championships. That's us, folks. We ride the coattails of Jesus Christ. If not for the grace of Jesus Christ, so go you and I. The very person you despise most on this planet would be you apart from the grace of Jesus Christ. It is all the grace of Jesus Christ. Christ has forgiven you, and if He hadn't forgiven you, you would be in a devil's hell. That's what I deserve, that's what you deserve. And how dare you not forgive others whenever God's forgiven you that way? Do you understand that? We love when we remember how much we've been loved. We forgive when we remember how much we've been forgiven. But there's a second thing that will motivate us to love this way. It comes from your relationship with Christ. It comes from your relationship with Christ. Look, you can't do this in your own. Religion does not empower you to love this way. Head knowledge religion ain't gonna do this. You gotta have a real relationship with God. Let me give you some good news, folks. The God of the universe is your Father, and He's crazy about you. He loves you with an everlasting love. And whenever you learn to walk with Him in a relationship, not religion, in a relationship, He will empower you to live like He lives. How does God love? Well, check it out. Look what the Bible says in verse 45. That you may be sons of your Father in heaven. How does God love? He causes His sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Think about it. Every day, there are millions of people that put their fist toward God and say, I hate you, God, and yet God gives them mercy every day. God says, I want you to love just like I love. And whenever you love like I love, then everybody's going to know you really are my child. Can I tell you something? That's how Jesus loved. Now think of it. This is not theory for Jesus. This is how Jesus lived his life. You know, whenever they slapped him on one side, he gave him the other cheek, didn't he? And they slapped him again and again and again and again and again. And then they ripped off his shirt, and then they beat his back, and then they gambled for his cloak. And then they put a crown of thorns on his head and a crossbeam on his back, and he went the extra mile for you and me. And did he cry for 10,000 angels to come and bring justice? No, the whole time he was praying what? Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. This is not theory for Jesus. It is the way of the cross. It is the way of salvation. And Jesus asked us to follow him. And whenever we follow Jesus' way, he will empower us with his supernatural love that we can't have in and of ourselves. But you got to, by faith, obey this and say, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to join you. Most of you know the story of Corrie ten Boom. She wrote the classic book, A Hiding Place. And in that book, she retells a story of her experiences in a Nazi concentration camp, her and her sister Betsy, and the horrors that they endured during that concentration camp. After the war was over, her sister Betsy had died in that concentration camp, but after the war, Corrie went on a lecture tour, and she was basically teaching on forgiveness. She said the only way we can get through the horrors of this war is through experiencing Christ's forgiveness and then learning to forgive others. And she went all across Germany with that lecture. One day, after one of those lectures, she notices a man coming down the aisle to talk with her. She immediately recognized him as one of the guards at the prison at Ravensbrück, one of the cruel men that had mistreated her sister and herself. Now here's the amazing thing. He didn't recognize her. He didn't know that she was one of his, prisoners. But she immediately recognized him and immediately recalled all the things that he had done to her and her sister. And he comes up to her and he says, Fräulein, it is good to know that we can be forgiven. And then he reaches up his hand to shake her hand. She said in that moment she wanted to slap it away. She wanted to spit on it. She didn't want to grab his hand, but she knew in her heart she needed to forgive. And she said in that moment when she shook his hand, it was like electricity of God's power and love just overwhelmed her body, and healing happened in her heart supernaturally in that moment. And she grabs his hand and says, and I forgive you too. That's what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is saying he will give you a supernatural kind of love when you choose to love this way. Tell me, folks, this is our only hope. This is the only hope for our sorrow-twisted world. I mean, listen, it's not going to be another economic system that's going to save this world. It's not going to be another political, regime that's going to change this world. What's going to stop the violence and the gangs downtown? What's going to stop the ethnic cleansing on this world? What's going to stop the broken homes and the shattered hearts is the way of the cross. This is what saves us. This is what changes us. And we are now the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And the Bible says that we now are to join Christ in his suffering. It's now your turn. That you have to now say, I'm going to join Christ. It's now my turn. In fact, I want you to turn to the person next to you and just say, it's now my turn. It's now my turn. It's now my turn. You see, this next week, there's probably not going to be somebody who slaps you. There's not going to be a soldier that's going to make you go a mile. But there's going to be somebody that's going to make you and hurt you, and you've got to, in that moment, say, Christ, I'm going to join you in your suffering. It's now my turn. It's my turn. Somebody's going to ask you for a favor. It may be a cranky person at work. It may be an irritable person at home. And in that moment, you're not going to feel like doing it, but you're going to say, Jesus, I'm going to join you in suffering. It's now my turn. You know what's going to happen is somebody's going to hurt you, and what's going to feel like you're going to want to hurt them immediately back, and you're going to say, Christ, I'm going to join you in your suffering. It's now my turn. It may be somebody on the freeway, maybe someone in your office, maybe somebody from your past. Satan's going to rise up somebody to test you this week. And when that happens, you have to make a choice. You're going to have to say, Christ, I'm going to believe you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to join you in your suffering. It's now my turn. And I tell you, whenever we choose to join Christ in the way of the cross, it will transform revenge into love. And that's how we're called to live.